Hey, here at Sinister Minutes, we know what it's like to be tied to an ultra-capitalist culture that demands constant purchasing of products for increasingly specialized purposes. Not only is this an unsustainable approach to living, it also takes all the surprise out of life. With that in mind, we're pleased to announce something we developed right here in the Sinister Minutes laboratories. It's new Sinister Minutes Schrodinger's Supplements. These capsules are guaranteed to do exactly what the name implies. Every time you take one, you'll get 30 seconds of something, either invisibility or flying. Which one's it gonna be? We don't know, and you won't either. That's what makes it so much fun. The pill's effect depends on a quantum enchantment collapse determined at the moment of ingestion, like a magical Schrodinger's gummy. Either aerokinetic amplification or optic phase displacement. That's science-y talk for flight or invisibility. Which one triggers is influenced by chaotic factors. Mood, relative humidity, what type of cheese you've eaten most recently. Any of those will have an effect. But don't try to predict it, because our patented unstable ethereal binding ensures you're likely to wind up surprised. Maybe you'll disappear, or maybe you'll shoot a few thousand feet into the air. Either way, you get half a minute to experience everything you can. Sinister Minutes Schrodinger's Supplements, because certainty is overrated. Sinister Minutes Schrodinger Supplements are based on recognized unobservability principles of quantum physics. The effect can't be known until activation. Do not take 2 capsules at once unless you are prepared to possibly disappear at 200 miles an hour. Not recommended for individuals with fear of heights, crowds, ghosts, mirrors, or responsibility. If symptoms of partial invisibility persist for more than 4 hours, seek the assistance of a magical practitioner. As with all Sinister Minutes products, the purveyors of said products will happily take your money and run at top speed until we are certain you haven't been following, at which time we will take said funds and purchase whatever the hell we want to. Got a minute or two? We have a way to make it not okay. Welcome to Sinister Minutes. I'm your host, writer and storyteller Kurt Homan. Next to me is the master of macabre musical musings, the maestro of mood, Tim Parker. Together, let us take you on a journey into the dark heart of disturbing. Sinister Minutes. It's not okay. Sinister Minutes features tales that include disturbing content. That's intentional because, like the podcast itself, the creators here at Sinister Minutes are really not okay. Now, having said that, realize that content featured on this podcast may include descriptions of some pretty horrific things at times. It is a dark fiction podcast, after all. So we hope that you are anticipating some degree of abuse and blood, of harm and death, of suicide, of sex, of injury, of mutilation, of pain, and certainly some profanity. Maybe a little bit of screaming, occasionally some flesh, a bit of torture, a bit of victim blaming. And as always, at some point, we're sure that you're going to encounter some witches. Don't say we didn't warn you. Welcome to Sinister Minutes Season 2, Episode 19. Today's story, The Mother, comes to us courtesy of guest author Harvey Carnell. It's a heartwarming tale, perfect holiday fare at this time when we all gather together for a day of expressing gratitude about our... Really? Heartwarming? Did you forget what podcast you're listening to here? This is Sinister Minutes, folks. Anything heartwarming on this show likely includes a rib retractor and a barbecue grill. Anyway, Harvey Carnell lives and writes in London. His pushcart-nominated fiction appears in Penumbra, the No Sleep podcast, Bards and Sages, and Riptide Journal, among others. His nonfiction appears in Gamut, Aurealis, and the Lovecraft Annual. Find him at www.harleycarnell.com. After the story, it's time for a musical interlude from Tim with some dark chill called Midnight Ripples. Thanks as always for listening, for supporting what we're doing, for sharing Sinister Minutes with everybody, for hitting the like icon wherever you listen to us, for subscribing so you don't miss a single one of our delectable episodes, and please visit us at sinisterminutes.com, where you'll find links to all the episodes, places to subscribe, juicy bits about us, and even a submission form, if you've written a tale and want us to consider narrating it on the show. As Tim and I slowly digest the results of the stupendous turkey carnage holiday known as Thanksgiving, we're feeling thankful today for all the people around us and all the ways in which all of us are not okay. The Mother, written by Harvey Carnell, narrated by Kurt Homan. When my dad told me that my mom had gone away, I thought he meant that she had died. He said she hadn't died, but she just left. He said we wouldn't be seeing her anymore, and that he would now be looking after me. That sounded a lot to me like she was dead, but he reiterated that she wasn't. Now, he said cheerily, how about I make you some breakfast? It was around a week later that my dad came and told me that my mother had come back. Can I see her? I asked. He said that I couldn't, and that wasn't how things worked. He said it wouldn't be like before. She would still be here, but there'd be no sitting and watching TV together, no reading of ghost stories, and no walks in the woods outside our house. She's back, he concluded, but she's not really here. I didn't know what he meant by any of this until one night I was lying in bed and heard my dad walking about upstairs. A few seconds later, I saw my dad walk past my bedroom to go to the toilet. I may have only been a child, and not a particularly bright child at that, but even I knew that footsteps had to belong to two different people. I crawled out of my bed and then crept up to the upstairs hallway. When I got there, there was nothing there except a faint whiff of something that might have been a smell or a shadow. I spent the next few minutes walking the corridor but saw nothing. When I came back downstairs, my dad was waiting for me. He asked me what I had been doing, and I told him that I thought I had heard Mom walking around. I told you, he said, it's not like before. You won't be seeing her. Now go to bed. As I was playing in the garden the next day, I wondered what all this meant. I had often thought about either of my parents dying. My parents had thought it important early on to tell me that death was a part of life. I knew that everyone died, and that both of them would die at some point. In hindsight, I suppose their reasoning was to acclimatize me to death in case it ever happened. In reality, it just terrified me and caused me to see death as an imminent and ever-present presence. Yet what was happening now, whatever it may have been, did what their premature revelations could not. Suddenly, I did feel strangely at ease with death. For all its terrors, death had a finality to it, whereas I had no idea what to do with what was happening now. I was playing in some leaves. I had a friend from Australia who said you couldn't just play with leaves there. She told me that there were all sorts of horrific things buried in the leaves. She said that a friend of hers had gone into the leaves, and when she had come out, she'd been covered in a swarm of insects, and it had taken her parents and a hose to get them off, and then she had been in the hospital for months afterwards because the things in the leaves that had bitten and stung her were not known to doctors or the human immune system. Feeling grateful that we didn't have such leafy creatures here, I was having fun in the leaves when I saw something from the corner of my eye. I turned so the corner of my eye was now the front of my eye and realized that what I had seen had come from the window. I screamed for my dad and told him what had happened. "It was probably the sun," he said. I suppose that it could have been the sun, but there was a time that I would have thought that it was. The sun could do all sorts of things with your vision and conjure all manner of things in your mind, but I didn't think that I could believe such things anymore. I woke up from my dream because of noises coming from the attic. There were thuddings and poundings, scrapings and screechings, all of which had seeped into the dream. I also heard frantic voices. I couldn't hear what the voices were saying because they were too far away, but I was curiously certain that I heard my name a few times. I remembered that at the end of a long corridor there was a little room where we kept boxes. In that room there was a little string which you pulled to release the attic stairs. I remembered that we didn't go into the attic anymore because Dad had gone in there one Christmas to get the Christmas decorations, and the place had been swarming with dead wasps. My dad was terrified of wasps and was overwhelmed by this avalanche of them, dead or not. My mum had then gone in and had said the wasps weren't dead, and they were hornets. "Hornets, they remember," my mum said. "Always remember that. You kill a hornet, come back a week later, and all their hornet friends will remember you. They are a vicious, vengeful creature. But then again, they probably think the same about us. They're only trying to survive and make their way through their lives. And how different is that from us, really?" We locked the attic away like a dead body and never went into it, yet now someone was up there and running around in it. I was about to go and tell my dad about this when I remembered that we didn't have an attic, and the incident with the wasps had either happened in the garden or, more likely, had never happened at all. My dad began sneezing. My mum used to always make fun of my dad for the way he sneezed. In one of my books or comics, when a character sneezes, they'd say, "Achoo!" My dad literally did this. I asked my dad why he was sneezing, and he said it was hay fever. This seemed odd to me because I knew it was not hay fever season. It was far too cold and wet for that. It was also dark, very dark, though I knew that had nothing to do with hay fever. I knew my dad was lying, and this was confirmed when I was in the living room one day. I was watching television. It was my favorite show, a show about a family that lived in space, or maybe were the last people in the world. I could never tell. I was so hooked on the show that when I turned to speak to Mom, I did it without thinking. Then I thought a lot about how sad it was that she was gone. Then I realized why I had turned around. It was because I could smell her perfume. My mama told me once about the brain. She had said that the brain was very old. She had said there were parts of the brain that were older than cavemen, and that was very old indeed. She had said there were parts of the brain that were from when we were monkeys, and from when we were lizards, and from when we were fish. She had told me it was really these parts of the brain that were in control and made us do and think all the weird things we did. I thought about this lack of thinking now because I had looked without thinking. The reason I had done this was because I had smelled my mother's perfume. The monkey or fish part of my brain had smelled the perfume, and it turned to speak to my mum because all it knew was the smell and didn't realize that my mum was gone. And it was the same perfume that was making Dad sneeze. The scent was all over the house. My mom had been a scientist of some sort, though I never knew what. She worked out of a room I was not allowed to go to, and then went to places in the city I was not allowed to know. Another science-y thing she had told me was that smells were the best. What was the word she'd used? Conjurers of memory. As I followed the scent, I remembered the perfume. Then I remembered that it was actually a soap. My mother had loved her soaps. She'd said that as a scientist, she was fascinated by how the different chemicals interacted to form the soaps. I followed the soap, and I followed it to the end of the house. I came to the window where the hall ended. The window belonged to a little room that was not really a room, but just a bit of space. The smell of soap was very strong here. There was also a sound. I knew immediately what the sound was, but because of the context, I was confused. As I said, the room was just a bit of space, yet the sound I could hear was running water, and then the sound of a hand slicing and swishing through that water, as though to conjure bubbles. Suddenly I remembered a story my mother had told to me many years ago. It was about how the house had been extended in the Victorian era, and what became this bit of space used to just be empty air in the garden. She told me a story, sometimes saying it was real, sometimes saying it was just a story. There's a ghost that comes here every night, and she walks up to here, and then she stops and turns back around. Do you know why she does that? I would always shake my head, smiling, eager to hear the answer despite knowing it. It's because in her world, the house ends there. She's walking along the corridor, and the corridor ends because that's where it did in her time. She has no idea that there's any more house, so she turns back. I thought about this now, but then I realized it didn't make sense here. My mom was talking about a part of the house being added, not being taken away. I quickly drew up the house's map in my mind. The bathroom was on the other side of the hall. Were the acoustics making the sound of running water come all the way back here, like in that church we had been to, where you could whisper to each other from the other side of the room? Was that what I could hear? My dad came and found me, holding a tissue to his nose. He asked me what I was doing. I said nothing. He said it was time for dinner. In his other hand, he was holding a spatula. He put his arm around me and led me downstairs. He sneezed loudly as we walked past the bathroom, where the bath was bone dry. My dad started getting iller. Soon I realized that it wasn't because of the soap. It had just been a coincidence. Not just because the soap went away, but because my dad started getting symptoms that transcended sneezing. He became very tired and his breath became ragged. He stopped going to work, but that was okay because he didn't go to work because he had retired years ago. He had run a company that had done very well. In that company, he had had a very bad accident, and he had never been the same after that accident. And because of that accident, he had gotten lots of money, so he had retired a lot earlier than most people did and had been able to buy us a nice big house that was by the sea. I had told my mom once that my dad was lucky. "You shouldn't say that," she said to me one night as we sat outside the room that had been added and looked out onto the sea. "Yes, the money's good, but the accident, it was awful. It did terrible things to your father. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy." She then told me about a story called The Monkey's Paw, although in fact she didn't tell me about it. I read it later and then retroactively inputted it into this conversation. So my dad not going to work was not different, but what was different was that he didn't leave the house. I had known from a young age that my dad loved leaving the house until I had learned years later that he in fact hated leaving the house, but had to leave it regularly to go on long walks as a consequence of his accident. "If I don't exercise every day," he said to me, "I'll get very sick." My dad would come out to make dinner, although that was it. He could just about manage to do that and then eat with me before he had to retreat back to his room again. Sometimes even the act of lifting cutlery to his mouth was like a skirmish. I said that maybe it was time for me to do the cooking, and he smiled at me. "Remember that time you tried to do the cooking?" he reminded me, "and you got so badly burnt?" One night, I came down to get a midnight snack at 3 in the morning. I opened the fridge and took out a jar of mayonnaise and then slices of ham and cheese to put between slices of bread. In the cupboard, I took out a bottle of pickles. In the vegetable basket, I took out the lettuce. I opened a new bottle of mustard. While I was making my sandwich, something occurred to me. Although Dad never left the house, I was able to make my sandwich, and Dad was always able to make dinner. We also never run out of toilet paper or kitchen roll or anything else. I asked him about this the next day after he martyred himself making breakfast. "It's your mother," he said, looking confused and breathing heavily. "She goes out and gets the stuff now." He let out a small, pathetic sneeze and then rubbed a tissue across his sore, raw nose. "But Mom's gone," I told him. Dad shook his head, a tomato spilling its seeds off his fork. "No, I told you, remember. She came back. She goes out early in the morning before you're awake. Sometimes she goes late at night when you're asleep." My dad was too ill to make dinner that night, so I made him some toast. Although I didn't toast it because I wasn't allowed to use the toaster. I put my dad's toast on a tray with all his favorite spreads: peanut butter, jam, relish. My dad also had some special drinks that were kept in labeled containers in the fridge. These were something to do with his accident. I brought my dad his toast and his special drink, and we sat in his room and watched the television, and he went to sleep. As I was loading the dishwasher, I heard a noise behind me. It was my dad, wheezing heavily, and I told him to get back to bed. I turned around and saw a shadow walking down the hallway. I knew from the shadow's shape that it did not belong to my dad, and that it did belong to my mom. I dropped the plate on the floor. When I did, the shadow got scared and began to run down the hall. I chased the shadow because that's all it ever was. Whenever I turned a corner or ran up some stairs, by the time I got to the end, the shadow was all that was left, and it would then slip away. "Mom! Mom!" I called out. Our house was big, again because of the accident. Yet it wasn't until I chased the shadow through it that I realized just how big it was. Finally, I came to the final corridor, which separated the downstairs from the upstairs. It had 3 large windows that looked out onto the sea. I stood at one end of the corridor, the shadow at the other. I was panting from running so much, and the shadow was trembling for the same reason. Realistically, I should have been able to see my mother from where I was standing, rather than her shadow. But tonight something to do with the lights and the clouds obscured her. Outside I could hear the waves crashing. The moon reflected and sparkled off the sea, and a wave of its light splashed against the windows. Yet it was the kind of light that blinds rather than illuminates. The shadow began rustling and twitching. Then I realized she was actually whispering something to me. "What, Mom?" She whispered louder, more insistently, and the smell of soap became even stronger. "I can't hear you. I can't hear you, Mom." Then she screamed something. Although it wasn't a scream, it was my father sneezing. It made me jump and turn around to face him. When I turned back, my mother was gone. Father became sicker still. beyond the point which I knew you could get sick. He did not come down at all anymore. I asked him if I should get a doctor. He said no. Your mother, she's making me my medicines. When I'm better, I'll be better than ever. Even than before the accident. I've never told you this before, but every day is absolute agony because of the accident. After this, there'll be no more pain. I didn't know if my dad was getting better or not, but one day when I came into his room, the whole place was trashed. Everything was on the floor. All the drawers were open, many of the books were splayed open, and in some cases, irreparably ripped. My dad was too weak to tidy, so I did it, while he occasionally muttered that I was a good son. While tidying, it occurred to me that this was not mindless destruction, but evidence of someone looking for something. My dad tried to claim that he had done it, but I knew that this could not be true, as he was too weak. His lies and the methodical, if messy, search made me wonder just what it was my mother had been looking for. One night, I woke up to my mum in my room. She was looking through my drawers. With my eyes barely open, I called out, "Mum, go back to sleep." A voice hissed at me with such venom that I kept my eyes closed tight as a screw until I heard all the rummaging and slamming stop and my door slowly close. I supposed that now my mum was dead or gone, or whatever she was. This was all I would see of her, little snatched glimpses and shadows, faint whispers and admonitions. Another night, I was sure I could feel my mother standing at the end of my bed watching over me. Yet some strong instinct from that reptile or fish part of my brain told me not to open my eyes, no matter what happened. I did not, and so was never sure if my mother was there, if someone else was, or if I had just imagined the whole thing. The next morning, or maybe a few mornings after, I woke up to the smell of a cooking breakfast. My mother's medicines had obviously worked, and my father was now up. I ran downstairs into the kitchen. My mother turned to face me and smiled. "Hello, darling," she said, placing a plate of breakfast on my place. "Mum, before you eat, I'd like to tell you something." I sat down at the table, and my mum took my hands in hers. Her hands were freezing, and I felt them soothing those old burns of mine. "Your father, he's gone away for a while, and he's not going to be coming back for some time, if at all." She leant forward and kissed my hand, right where my fingers weren't. "But it'll be lovely, won't it? Just the two of us out here." She then began reciting from that poem she liked, and as the poem droned dreamily on, I listened carefully, and when I listened long enough, I heard the sound of footsteps coming from the attic below. Midnight Ripples, composed and performed by Tim Parker. Sinister Minutes is presented by Kurt Homan and Tim Parker. The musical score was composed and performed by Tim Parker. Our production team consists of Kurt Homan and Tim Parker. On behalf of everyone here at the Sinister Minutes podcast, namely Kurt Homan and Tim Parker, we thank you for listening, for joining us as we explore all the ways in which we are not okay. This audio program is copyright by Kurt Homan and Tim Parker under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.